Will, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate you being here. Tell me a little bit about who you are and why you're running for Congress.
Sure. So my background is actually in K-12 education. I graduated from college in 2008, began my career as a high school history teacher, but have worked in and around schools in a variety of capacities over the last, 17 years since I graduated, if I can do the math correctly. Um, why am I running now, and why for Congress? So the idea of running for office has been on my radar for at least 15 years. Can't remember exactly, but can trace it back certainly at least that far. Um, I did, imagined that it would be something that I might enjoy for certain reasons, and that might interest me for certain reasons, given the things that I like to think about. But there were also parts of it that turned me off or scared me a little bit, and prevented me from really doing it. But I've had it in my mind as something that, if the time ever came and seemed right, that I would like to do. And so here the time is, and now it seems right. I think that our country is not in a great place right now. Things are very divisive, and as a result, we get subpar policy that doesn't really meet the needs of most Americans, regardless of their political beliefs. And I don't see that either of the two groups who have gotten us into this situation are really capable of getting us out of it. Sometimes I worry that they're not even interested in getting out of it. So the impetus then is that if we're going to fix things, if we're going to pave the way for a better future and address the divisiveness and the problems that exist currently, then we have to try something different. And I believe the time for that is now. So I am running as an independent because I think we need to introduce a better brand of politics. And I hope that that will appeal to people on both sides of the political spectrum, who are tired of the divisiveness and tired of the poor outcomes that result of that policy wise.
Yeah, you talk about poor outcomes and divisiveness. What we're seeing right now in Washington, D.C. maybe is something of an example of that happening. What do you make of the government shutdown? And if you were representing the 22nd district right now in Washington, what would you be doing differently than John Mannion?
Sure. Well, so what I make of it is that this is just, an unfortunate product of what the two-party system can deliver at this point, right? And it can't deliver much beyond dysfunction. So this is obviously not the first one of these we've seen. In fact, they've become commonplace at this point, right? And this will keep going until one side or the other decides that they have taken too much political heat, right? They're both willing and happy to keep the government shut down, as long as they think the other team is going to take the blame, right? And that's an enormous problem because the American people, again, regardless of their political beliefs, are going to be the ones suffering and bearing the brunt of that. So what would I be doing differently? I mean, the reason this happens, right, is because the government runs out of money, and it's Congress's job to keep the government funded by passing an annual budget, which they haven't done since 1997, which I'm pretty sure, Luke, is before you were born. So again, they can't deliver on the basics of their jobs. So the dysfunction here is to be expected, frankly. So the way to do that is to talk to people. It's to actually engage. It's to make this meaningful instead of a political game of chicken involving nothing but petty political concerns, right? Because that's what it is. Their first and only lens on the shutdown is political, and that's true of both parties.
Fundamentally, the reason why Democrats have been withholding support for the continuing resolution to fund the government and keep it open is because they are concerned about the expiring subsidies for the Affordable Care Act at the end of this year. Are you supportive of those subsidies and of the Affordable Care Act more broadly?
Yes, I think the Affordable Care Act was an imperfect solution, to the problems it was trying to address with healthcare. But I think that, again, that's because it was primarily a partisan solution to it. At the same time, it did things correctly. It did expand healthcare. It was, not an ideal solution, but it did. There were things about it that were helpful. I don't think kicking people off of healthcare coverage is good. I think, to address that overall landscape requires more comprehensive legislation. But in the short term, we should absolutely be advocating for people to receive those benefits and that coverage.
What does that comprehensive solution, that ideal solution look like for you on healthcare?
That's a wonderful question, and this is one of the places where I think I get to be different than a typical politician, and say I have ideas, but I don't honestly know. And that's kind of the point, right? Is we're having real debates. If we're having big kid conversations in Congress, we can bring together a lot of good ideas from people who know more about the specifics of that than I do. And we can actually try and pass something comprehensive. But because we refuse to have those conversations, because we refuse to have those debates, we get subpar policy outcomes at best, right? So I don't have all the answers to that specific question. I have more specific answers to different types of questions. But I believe that through the process that is supposed to exist, we can arrive at answers that will expand coverage because people do deserve that and can bring costs down. I think those things are absolutely possible.
Do you think that Medicare for all would be a potential solution that you'd support?
I think it is a potential solution. I would want to learn more about what that costs and the logistics of implementing it before I say that I would support it for sure. But I do think that there are arguments to be made for some sort of single payer system. I also think that there are legitimate arguments against that. And again, that's part of it, right? We need to be considering those trade-offs and actually looking at them rather than saying, well, single payer is the answer out of hand because, or no single payer will never work because right? There's a more thoughtful conversation to happen there. And I would like to be part of that.
Yeah, we're going to stay in the doctor's office for a little bit because there's an issue
Yeah.
that caused a lot of partisan divide, which is abortion access. Obviously,
Mhm.
Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court 3 years ago. Were you
Mhm.
supportive of Roe v. Wade prior to it being overturned? And what do you think the role is for government, local,
Mhm.
state, and federal,
Yeah,
in restricting abortion access?
sure. So I think that women deserve to have control over their bodies and the decision making of their bodies, right? Um, I think part of what's wrong with this conversation is that abortion gets kind of pitched as something that women want, and I don't think that that is normally the case. I think that for the most part, when women uh, need abortions or get abortions, there is a reason for that other than just like, oh, I want to, kind of casually end this pregnancy. And I think the way that we kind of view that is part of the problem with the debate. But the fact of the matter is that it is not the government's decision to make, or it's not the government's place, I should say, to make decisions about anyone's body, really. But in this particular scenario, about a pregnant woman's body, that should be her decision, and she should have the right and control and autonomy in consultation with doctors and the loved ones in her life to make that decision.
Do you believe that there should be any restrictions on abortion at any level of government?
I think, yeah, I would say perhaps either, viability as it was determined, or maybe you could even say third trimester, um, with elective abortions, right? So things that are not related to a medical issue of sorts, whether that's affecting mother or child, right? So if you have gotten to that point in the pregnancy, then would say that no, elective abortions at that point potentially.
Yeah. What is the
Yeah.
distinction for you between that kind of point of viability in the third trimester and prior to that point?
Sure. Well, and I am neither a medical professional nor am I God, right? So I can't answer these things for sure. And I think that's again part of the problem is that there are a lot of non-medical professionals, and certainly God is not weighing in on this. And so, but a lot of people kind of treat themselves as perhaps those things are speaking for those things. So because I am not a doctor, to say the difference between viability and third trimester is a little bit difficult, right? I don't know how I define it. What I think matters to me is that if there is a point, and this is what I believe, Roe v. Wade, when it was determined, was trying to do with that idea of viability, that the baby could survive, right? That at that point, I don't want there an elective reason to terminate the pregnancy, right? If the baby is at a point where it can survive, then perhaps then restrictions on why an abortion could happen, right? Again, the health of the mother and the child are the paramount concerns.
Let's talk about the economy. We're expecting a lot of jobs in our area as a result of Micron. There are concerns that the Trump administration, that Republicans in Congress could repeal the CHIPS Act. How would you work with President Trump, with congressional Republicans, to make sure that funding for the investments that are being made in our region is not taken away.
Sure. And I'm glad you asked specifically about working with President Trump and Republicans, because again, I believe a big part of what is not happening right now is the willingness of either side to engage in those conversations. So I would certainly, just as would be supportive of the left in the conversation we just had about abortion, right? I would also want to engage in a healthy, respectful manner on both ends. So as it regards specifically the CHIP Act and Micron, this is a big part of what President Trump is pushing, and his economic agenda is AI and making sure that the United States, wins the AI race with China and is fully investing in AI and the capacity both that it has shown so far and that it may continue to show. Um, Microchip development is a key part of that. So I believe there is a very strong bipartisan impetus and motivation to actually keep those funds in place. I would imagine that the consideration of withdrawing a lot of that is political more than policy based. But I would hope that there's a real opportunity to engage broadly on this issue about how we can make sure that whether it's the CHIPS Act specifically or projects like Micron across the country, right, continue to come to life to bring jobs to here, of course, in the 22nd district, but across the country and continue that economic growth broadly. So I
Yeah.
would certainly want to work with the president. And if the considerations were, is this financially appropriate? Well, I think, again, there's a lot of healthy area for conversation. Then the administration does believe in this. If it's political, I think that still a reason to have that conversation, but it would look different.
I think the president's argument has been on this issue that the United States government does not need to give subsidies to companies like Micron to build factories in the United States, that instead he'll just place tariffs on microchips that are coming in, and those tariffs will negatively incentivize those companies to build here. What do you make of that argument, and what have you made so far of the president's tariff strategy?
Yeah. Well, so generally speaking, I would say I support the idea of trade being, let's say this, low barriers to trade. Okay. So perhaps not fully free trade, but when there is a need for something like tariffs, for example, they should be implemented strategically, thoughtfully, and not as blunt instruments of force, which I think is primarily how President Trump is using them currently. And I don't believe that as an instrument of blunt force, they are going to be as effective as the administration believes when it comes to those incentives that you're talking about, right? That's more stick, less carrot. Um, there is a place for stick, certainly, but we also do need there to be a healthy carrot, right? We want people to invest in these types of things for the right reasons, not simply out of fear of tariffs and whatever the consequences of that might be. So I do think that there is something to be said for the president's argument, but again, I think that needs to be wielded strategically and like a scalpel. And I think that especially as some of the tariffs that he has implemented, as things play out on that, right? And what does it really look like? Do we have data so far on are these companies doing some of the things they say they're going to do? Are the tariffs having that achieved effect? Well, there is an opportunity right there to sit down and evaluate how is the strategy working and where might we need to change it.
Do you agree more broadly with anything that the Trump administration has done so far? Is there a positive point that you'd point to, something you'd align with him on?
Sure. I think controlling the border, right? I don't love much of what's happening when it comes to the deportations, but I do believe that it's important that the United States actually have control over its borders, that we know who is coming here as best as possible, and if anything, that they might be bringing in, right? So there is a reality to that I think President Trump is trying to address. Um, in a lot of ways, I do worry about this presidency and the actions that President Trump has taken. I would hope that there would be the opportunity again in conversations, common ground around things like economic development, not tariffs necessarily, but I don't think that there is a whole lot that I currently agree with the administration on.
You talk about being concerned about what the Trump administration is doing. Congressman Mannion has been expressing his concerns, and a lot of your launch of this campaign has been centered on how you disagree with the style in which
Mhm.
Congressman Mannion has been going about that. Talk a little bit about your disagreements with him, and whether you have any substantive disagreements with what he's done or what he stands for in Congress right now.
No, I think it is more stylistic. But again, I think that this is part of the problem, right? I'm not here pretending that I have the answers to all of the different things that we have to address and all of the problems. But both sides, it has become so divisive and ossified that both sides are pretending that. And therefore, you know, maybe politicians to an extent have always been actors, but so much of what our Congress people are doing now today is theatrical and for again political purposes, and playing this game and doing this song and dance. And so that is it's a stylistic difference, but it's also a really fundamental and important one, because if you're not willing to participate in that song and dance and this charade and facade, and it's all about optics now, that if that stylistic one becomes a much more substantive one, because I actually am willing to go talk to people on the other side. I am willing to say, you know what? I think that we do have a taxing and spending problem. How, if we actually care about the national debt as we have pretended to for so much of the past few decades, right? How do we sit down and fix this problem? Because I agree it's a problem. How do we actually control our borders and make sure that there is control over who and what comes in to the extent possible, while also saying that there's a reality to the people who are here, and how do we make sure that that process works out both for people who come in the future and who come currently, right? So
You bring up the
these
national debt.
conversations.
I don't mean to interrupt, but you bring up the national debt. How do you address the national debt? Do you have ideas coming in about how to do that?
Yeah, well, so I have two broad economic ideas that I'll share now, and one of them is certainly an element of this. The other, I believe, would generate economic growth that would also be helpful. The first is a wealth tax. I believe that we do need to start taxing wealth. I think that's actually important. I am not a proponent of eat the rich. I am glad that we live in a country that actually incentivizes people to pursue that wealth and create jobs and opportunities for others. But because we facilitate that, we should ask those people to give back as well. And so I think it's important that we implement a wealth tax. The other part of this, and we were just talking about incentives for Micron, for example, but as you probably know, and I think no one knows all of them because there's so many, but our tax code is riddled with loopholes that primarily benefit corporations and the extremely wealthy. I think we need to close as many of those as possible. And I think instead we need to start trying to create loopholes for small businesses. So I'm going to give you a very concrete example here, right? You currently can get a loophole for, or a tax credit, right, for owning a private jet, right, a corporation or whatever. So if you want to fly around the country, great, there's a tax credit for that. Meanwhile, one of my best friends from back in Mississippi, where I'm originally from, owns his own small cleaning business, clean houses. Mine's a college town, so dorms and stuff. You obviously at SU very familiar. So back home in my small town in Mississippi, housing and transportation are problems, right? Again, we're here in a blue state, and those things are problems in a lot of these communities. Back in Mississippi, a red state, there are also problems, right? Our system is failing people regardless of where they are in the political spectrum. So my friend, how does he try to address this, right? Well, he buys used cars that he can then let his employees use, right? So he's doing two things. He is investing in his business because now his employees can get to work since they've been priced further out of town. And he's investing also in his employees and their ability to continue earning a paycheck and being productive, which is super important and healthy, right? Is there a tax credit for my friend who buys used cars for his employees? We both know that the answer is no. But again, you got a corporate jet and we got a tax credit for you. The incentives are all wrong. I believe with a wealth tax, and that if we could, again, close as many of those corporate loopholes as possible and work to create similar incentives for small businesses, that we could bring in revenue and grow the economy, and ideally then keep income taxes lower even than they are now, right? The top income tax bracket is still 37%, which is pretty high. So it would be nice with those other two things in place to then bring down income taxes.
Yeah, I want to get you on your way. Thank you again for all of your time. I have five rapid fire questions for you, and then we can get you up and out of here. Do you have a favorite sports team?
Yes, if it's college, it's Ole Miss, the Rebels. That's where I grew up. My parents both worked there. I did not go to school there. I needed to go away, but Ole Miss Rebels at the collegiate level. Professionally, Atlanta Braves. I played baseball as a kid. They were always good. They were always on TV.
You came to join us for our Syracuse mayoral debate, which we greatly appreciated. Do you have a candidate that you are supporting in that race?
I am still undecided, and I have just a few more days to decide. I was impressed by most of the candidates last week. I think I have narrowed it down to two of the four, but I am still undecided with just
You
a few days
you
left.
share which two they are?
So I am considering either Sharon Owens or Tom Babylon.
Wow, the Democrat or
Yeah,
the Republican. That's on brand for you,
yeah,
Mr. Independent.
yeah. I,
Um, Share with me a member of Congress currently serving that you admire.
I got this same question recently, and the truth is, I somewhat struggled with it. And that's not because I think that everyone in the current Congress is awful by any means, but I don't see the kind of leadership that I would hope for. So I'm happy to give you someone, but I don't know if I can actually pick a current Congress person that I would put on that list. Um, I would go with, since we're here in this district, John Katko, who was congressman before Brandon Williams, who was before John Mannion. I know that I disagreed with him on a number of things, but I respected his integrity.
I asked you about the Syracuse mayoral race. I'm going to ask you about New York City just because everybody's talking about it. If you
Sure.
were a New York City voter, which of the three, Sliwa, Cuomo, Mamdani, would you support?
I think I would support Mamdani. I don't think it's best that Cuomo return to politics at this point, so I feel fairly certain I would not support him. I know that I disagree with some of Mamdani's policies as well, just as I would with John Katko. He's further to the left than I am on a number of things. But I do think he represents change. And I think right now, the United States needs to be attempting to change things. That's what my campaign is about. And so the fact that he is willing to try something different, he may not ultimately be successful, but he's not going to destroy things in the way that it's presented. And if nothing else, we'll learn, and hopefully he can be successful in some ways and actually move the needle.
Are there specific policies that you think of that you'd be distinct from him on?
So I think that there are things that we need to do better as a society, kind of helping people pay for and covering the cost of. But there are real financial considerations to how much of that we can do and which areas to prioritize. And so I think the idea that, a lot of things can be made completely free, right? Whether it's transit and busing, or universal pre-K, uh, we have to really take a hard look at what that means to cover that cost, and implement it in a way that actually is useful and not just saying we're doing this for free, right? So it's things that kind of to that extent.
What's a book that you read recently?
So you want fiction or nonfiction?
Hey, listen, whatever you want to talk about.
Okay. So actually, I'll start with fiction. I prefer nonfiction, but I try intentionally to mix it up. And I just read this recently on a plane flight. I knocked it out in basically a day. It's this woman's debut novel. It was fantastic. It's a little bit soul crushing. Um, Clytemnestra. And so I should say here, I was a religion and classics, ancient history major in college. So Greek mythology and stuff like that is a niche for me. But Clytemnestra is a famous figure from Greek mythology. I knew a lot of the myth and the stories going in, and I still found it kind of soul crushing, but incredibly good. Again, her debut novel. I'm hoping that there's future ones. So that's what I would go with for fiction. For nonfiction, see, this is maybe a year ago that I read this, but it's still sticking with me a lot. It's called "The Delusion of Crowds: Why People Go Mad in Groups." And it's an interesting insight kind of into mob mentality and groupthink. And the author, who I believe is both an economist and a neuroscientist, um, he doesn't look at any modern examples, but he considers financial mania and political mania and religious mania all in the past. And you read these past examples, and he could have been writing this 2 weeks ago about all sorts of current things, right? And I won't say what exactly, but it really does. It's a helpful insight into how our brains work, especially when we're all together, and that can include being all together online in the modern world. And the biggest kind of takeaway is this: is people go crazy all at once and in big groups. They come to their senses much slower and all by themselves. Um, and again, I think you look at a lot of things that happen, and you can see how that's very applicable.
Fascinating. Well, thank you so much
Yeah.
for joining us. I really appreciate all your time, and we'll definitely keep in touch as the campaign progresses. Best of luck on the trail.
Thanks so much, Luke. I appreciate it as well, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much. You too.